That's how I built my business. That's how I want to continue to build my business. I've never paid for any leads, never plan on paying for any leads. But I've been just one that wanted to rub elbows with people. And when you start rubbing elbows with people, you never know who you're going to rub elbows with. Have you ever wanted to get involved in real estate development, but didn't know where to begin? Do you think real estate development is only for the large hedge funds or major corporations, the big guys? Or have you done some development in the past and are looking to scale up? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the W.I.R.E.D Wealth and Real Estate Development Podcast. I am your host, Nick Smith. Get ready to have your mind blown and rewired as we discuss all aspects of creating wealth and real estate development. Welcome to another episode of the Wealth and Real Estate Development Podcast, better known as W.I.R.E.D. I am your host, Nick Smith, and I do want to thank you for joining us or joining me on another episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to like this video, any video that you do like on the channel. Subscribe, definitely, or even hit the notification bell. I greatly appreciate it. And if you're watching or if you're listening, wherever you listen to podcasts, definitely I would appreciate it if you subscribe, even leave a comment, what you like, what you don't like, the good, bad, the ugly. I like to hear it all and see it all. So I do want to thank you all for joining again. Today's video or today's episode might be a little shorter than normal, but got some things that recently were just kind of placed in my heart to discuss and, talk about. Had a recent experience with one of my family members, my mother in particular. She was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer in October of 2022. And she actually just rang the bell a little bit, just a few days ago. For those that don't know what that means right now she is cancer-free. So truly thank God for everything. But I learned some stuff that I think is applicable even to this real estate development and business building process going and watching her through the journey, because it was a journey for sure. We got 3 steps. The title of today's episode is 3 steps to your first, real estate development. And 3 steps, we're going to go APE today. Not the number 8, but APE, A-P-E. The acronym stands for acknowledge it, plan it, and execute it. Again, acknowledge it, plan it, and execute it. As I watched my mother kind of go through this breast cancer treatment and recovery process, one of the first steps was there had to be an acknowledgement. Had to acknowledge that there is an issue. And I think a lot of times we get in life, one of the problems that we have is that we don't acknowledge where we are. Can't address anything until you acknowledge that it needs to be addressed. When you think about it in terms of business or in terms of progress, where we want to go, you first have to acknowledge where you are. Listening to a book by Keith Cunningham called The Road Less Stupid, and talked about in his book, when you are here and you want to go there, you can't chart the path until you recognize and realistically take a view at what here is or where here is. So you have to learn where here is. If you, like me right now, are a little debt heavy, I get it. I totally understand, but you have to acknowledge it. If you've made some bad choices, some bad decisions, you have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge where you are. You have to be realistic about where you are. My favorite book, of course, is the Bible. My pastor actually preached on this past Sunday. David was one of the kings of Israel, probably the most well-known king of Israel. Jesus Christ actually in the Bible is referenced as the son of David in several passages in the New Testament. But David had an issue. David made a big old mistake when, as king, he had a general by the name of Uriah, and he messed around and he saw Uriah's wife bathing one day. Asked who this woman was, and it was Bathsheba. And he actually had Uriah placed in the front line of the battle so he'd be killed, so he could basically take his wife. That's what it boiled down to. But a prophet came to David and confronted him on his issue. And one of the things that helped David move past was that he acknowledged it. Scripture says that he said, against thee, and he's talking to God, against thee and against thee alone have I done this evil. So he acknowledged it. So you first got to acknowledge where you are. In order to make progress, you have to acknowledge and you have to be real about where you are. You don't necessarily have to focus on where you are, but you do have to acknowledge where you are. And you also have to acknowledge the resources that are at your disposal, because a lot of times we look for things outside of our purview, outside of our reach points. We look for people outside of our reach points. We look for people, that we see on TV or people that are popular. But sometimes you got to look and see what resources do you have right around you. I'm a big proponent, even as a commercial real estate broker, even when I was doing residential, I'm a big proponent of going out, meeting people, attending events, attending live events, attending networking events. That's how I built my business. That's how I want to continue to build my business. Never paid for any leads, never plan on paying for any leads, but I've been just one that wanted to rub elbows with people. And when you start rubbing elbows with people, you never know who you're going to rub elbows with. So you have to get out there and you have to mingle with people, get with people. You can't be scared to talk to people, but you have to acknowledge. That's the first step. You have to acknowledge it. Acknowledge where you are. Again, going back to just my mother, her in the breast cancer situation, she had to acknowledge. We as a family had to acknowledge. It's a tough pill to swallow, of course, because that C word, nobody ever wants to hear that their family member is dealing with that, especially your mother, especially your mom. So, but we had to acknowledge it. We had to acknowledge that there was an issue. But sometimes you don't even have to acknowledge the issue. You have to also acknowledge what progress you've made. Even if it's small progress, you have to acknowledge that and be thankful for even the small wins, the small progress. But after you acknowledge it, then you do have to put some plans in place. You have to plan it. So first step is acknowledge it. Second step is plan it. You have to put a plan together. You have to try to put some strategy, some strategic partnerships together. You have to think about what you want to do, especially in this real estate development space. I mean, there are so many real estate in general. I mean, there are so many different avenues and different sectors that you can explore in the real estate arena. But you have to plan what it is you want to do. If you want to do development, do you want to do just a single family home? Do you want to build a single family home to start? Do you want to build a duplex to start? Do you want to rehab a duplex, or do you want to rehab a single family home? Do you want to start with a commercial property? Do you want to acquire a commercial property that's hugely dilapidated like I did? 24,000 square foot building that's been vacant for 20 or so years. Is that what you want to do? You have to decide what you want, and then you have to put a plan together. You have to, again, look for strategic partnerships. If you've never developed anything, your first development is probably not going to be a $30-40 million multifamily complex. Probably is not going to happen. Probably not the way it's going to operate. But if you're able to partner with some people, partner with somebody that does have those skill sets and that knowledge, you never know. You might be able to take on a larger project, but you by yourself, if you've never done development before, again, that goes back to acknowledging. You got to acknowledge your limitations. And those limitations could be knowledge-based, it could be skills-based, but you have to acknowledge it. And in your planning process, you need to start planning to team up with people. This development space is a team sport. It's something that rarely one individual can get everything done by themselves. It's rarely that somebody can get it all accomplished by themselves, but you got to have some team members, some people that are willing to assist you. And where you're weak, somebody else is strong. Like me, I hate paperwork. I hate it. Hate paperwork. But there's some people out there that are good with that. There's some people out there. So I hired a transaction coordinator when I was a residential broker. And that transaction coordinator took a lot of that paperwork off me, and I was able to focus on what I was good at. And that was bringing in business. I was going to meet people. I was having phone conversations. That's what I was good at. In this business, you have to plan where you want to be and find what you're good at. Are you good at finding the deal? Are you good at negotiating the deal? Are you good at finding the funding for the deal? Are you good at managing the deal? Because if it's a rehab or if it's new construction, somebody has to manage it. Somebody has to be on site, periodically. You have to keep an eye on what the contractors are doing. Again, got to go to networking events, got to get out there with people, and don't underestimate the importance of getting a coach. A lot of people are skeptical about hiring coaches or, hiring mentors, things like that, but they can be hugely instrumental to the success of your business. They can be hugely instrumental to your success. When you think about planning, I go back to, my mother's breast cancer situation. There had to be a plan. Once we acknowledged it, there had to be a plan put in place. And she had various doctors to help her out, to come up with that plan. We had oncologists, radiologists, and they had their different specifications and their different fields of expertise, when it came to it. And when you even do have a plan in place, sometimes you have to be flexible enough to adjust when the plan needs to adjust. My mother went through chemotherapy, had a double mastectomy, and she was not expecting, based off of what, her surgeon told her, based off of what her oncologist kind of inferred to her. She wasn't expecting to have to go through radiation, but that's what her radiologist recommended based on the type of breast cancer that she had. So had to make adjustments. When you're planning for developments, when you're planning for anything real estate development, got to be prepared for adjustments. Must be prepared for adjustments. There's no real estate project that I've ever been a part of or been involved with that has gone 100% as planned. It just doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. And you can't get frustrated with that, because I'm letting you know up front, there are going to be some change orders. In football, they call them audibles. Some things are going to change on the fly, and you got to be prepared for it. You got to be prepared for it. So we got first is acknowledge it. Second is plan it. Then we got execute it. The best laid out plan means absolutely nothing if you do not have execution, if you don't execute the plan. Acknowledging and planning, they are useless without execution. They're useless. If we don't have the wherewithal to actually execute on what we've planned, then your plan is basically as valuable as that sheet of paper you wrote it on. That's about as valuable as it is. And some people are good at acknowledging it. They acknowledge what they need. They acknowledge the resources that they have. They acknowledge the shortcomings that they may have, the limitations that they may have, and they're even good at putting the plan together. But where a lot of people get stuck is in the execution phase. A lot of people get held up in the execution. And a lot of times you have to, or we have to as people, do a deep dive and find out, why aren't we executing on the plan? Is it fear? Is it scared of what we don't know? Are we fearful of the mistakes that we're going to make? And it's not if you're going to make mistakes. It's just a when, because we all will make mistakes. Are we scared potentially that we can't raise the money that's needed? Why aren't we executing? Why aren't we executing? And you got to confront that, and you got to hit it head on. Going back, to kind of the impetus of this episode, dealing with my mother, we had to acknowledge the breast cancer, put together a plan, listen to her experts, allowed her to make the ultimate decision. But that plan had to be executed. The plan had to be executed in order for it to be successful. And thank God it was successful. But if you do these three things and do them consistently, I truly believe not just your real estate development goals, but your life goals, because it's no fun in succeeding in your real estate development, but your family is falling apart. That doesn't make sense. That's not fun at all. So these are 3 things that you can do to help, really get your goals across. And we're coming toward the end of 2023. We're entering, and this is October when I'm recording this. So we've got one last quarter. And I think everybody, is kind of in that vein or in that mindset, where we're starting to, think about 2024. We're starting to think about the end, this year's winding down, and we're going into 2024. But I truly believe if you consistently do these 3 things, acknowledge where you are, acknowledge what you need, make a plan for it, strategize, really, really think. That's another thing that Keith Cunningham's book talks about, The Road Less Stupid. Talks about making and creating thinking time. We ought to think, we ought to strategize in order to come up with that plan, in order to come up with the vision that we want. We got to think, but if we acknowledge it, and if we plan it and we execute, if we go ape, if we make that the target every day to truly, truly execute on, no matter how small the execution is, it's still execution. And that has to be our goal in order to get where we want to get in life. So again, I want to thank you all. I hope this podcast, this episode does help in some shape, form, or fashion. If it does, please, I ask you to share, like, subscribe, whether you're watching on YouTube, whether you're listening on wherever you listen to podcasts. I definitely appreciate it. And let's go get wired up. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please share this content with someone else who would benefit from it. I'm looking forward to having you with me on the next episode. Now go out and create some wealth and real estate development.